What does a virtuous life look like? Has a virtuous life always looked this way? If there has been change, was it for the good? Join us today while we discuss these questions in search of the truth. My name is Bryce.
And my name is Tim.
And welcome to the Townsmen. We're glad you're here. So Tim, what do you got for us today?
Today we are discussing something I found to be very useful. Benjamin Franklin's 13 Virtues. Stumbled upon him accidentally reading his autobiography. It was suggested to me because I was interested in studying education at the time.
Mm-hmm.
And he speaks quite a bit on that and how he was educated. And if you want to know how to do education well, his autobiography is a good thing to read.
Yeah.
So found his virtues in there and have been wanting to do an episode on those since I read it.
Yeah.
So that's what we're here for today.
Sounds good. So what are these virtues then?
Well, I'll just list them here and then we'll dig into them later.
Sure.
They are, and they go in order this way, intentionally: temperance, silence, order, resolution, frugality, industry, sincerity, justice, moderation, cleanliness, tranquility, chastity, and humility. That's our 13.
Yeah. Good laundry list.
It seems like a lot,
Mm-hmm.
and in many ways it is, but we'll break it down. And the whole point of these virtues is not just to have them floating around in your head as something like, oh yeah, I could shoot for that. But he actually made a plan to practice these in a procedural manner to eventually make habits out of them, to live a better life, to serve people better, to be more productive, and to serve himself better.
Yeah.
In a lot of ways. And if you've heard of Benjamin Franklin, there's a reason for that. These virtues work.
Mm-hmm. What you could say is that he had this ideal that he wanted to put into practice, and really on a daily or routine level of his practice.
He wanted to take it from the, if you will, kind of the abstract philosophical into the practical and practicable.
Yeah.
And I'm all for that.
Yeah. Something here at the Townsmen, and that's what we strive for. We're not just, like you said, armchair philosophers. We want to be out there in the town, in industry, in our lives, and in our families' lives too, and live out these virtues.
Make something happen. Yep.
For sure.
Bring some good. So how he enacted some of these virtues, he basically just made this whole chart, the days of the week at the top, the virtues on the left side.
Mm-hmm.
And if you're interested on following along on how to do this, there is a link in the description to a PDF file of what the virtues are, this chart I'm talking about, and instructions on how to follow it. And there will also be a link to the full PDF of his autobiography. So you can go to the section it suggests there in the description and read what he said for himself about this whole thing and some of his reasons for it and how to do it. I think it's very useful.
Yeah, and it might be something that maybe you want to kind of carry forward as well. And maybe, let's live out these 13 virtues, or maybe you kind of make your own list and work with that as well. Either way, this is kind of a catalyst for us to get back to thinking more virtuously instead of just in the day-to-day pragmatic level. But let's have a life of virtue that is loving God, loving neighbor, really the ideals that we hope to strive for. So I'm excited about this. Yeah,
me too. I'm excited to practice it. I'm excited to share it. And I guess we'll just go for it.
There we go.
On how he implemented these virtues.
Mm-hmm.
So basically, he made a small book and he drew up that chart like I was mentioning with the virtues on the left side and the days of the week on the top. So he would start with temperance. And let's say I started today, we're recording on a Sunday. At the end of the day, I would think back on my day and how I didn't practice temperance and make a little check mark for every infraction that I made. This isn't to get you in trouble. This isn't like an accountability thing where you have to share it with people and they get mad at you or whatever when you don't do it. This is strictly internal.
Yeah.
This is for you as an individual. But for everything you made a mistake for, make a check for it. And then continue your week, try to improve, And as you improve, you will start to notice those check marks, hopefully, lessening and lessening. And once you have an entire 7-day week, doesn't have to be Monday through Sunday, it can be Wednesday through Wednesday, it doesn't matter.
Right.
It just needs to be 7 days in a row. If you have a 7-day stretch without any check marks on temperance, you move on to the next virtue of silence, and you do the exact same thing, and you work your way down. You get bad habits out of the way, and you build new practices, new habits that enact and practice these virtues.
Mm-hmm. So it's an internal checklist.
Yep.
For you to really do some self-assessment, self-analysis, self-understanding. And it's not to get a bunch of gold stars to make you feel good about yourself, but it's really to build habits that are beneficial to society rather than more detrimental, if you will.
Yeah, for sure. And it's very good for, speaking personally, it's good for me because I can read through a list of 13 virtues and like, oh yeah, those are really good. Those are really deep. Those are whatever.
Yeah, I like these. I want to live by them.
Yeah, give it 3 days and then something comes up and they just kind of slip your mind and you get back into like work mode.
Yeah.
You know, like I'm working on cabinets right now, and if I'm getting frustrated with sanding something, you get focused on that little piece of paint that won't come off and it just turns into a gooey, crappy, dusty mess.
Yeah.
It's easy to forget those things, but this is a practice to hopefully make you more conscientious of yourself and really to some degree your affect in the world of how do you come across, how are you acting, what are behaviors of yours that you may or may not be aware of yet that you could become aware of and hopefully do better.
Yeah, that does kind of remind me of kind of like a little bit in James as well, where it talks about the use, the righteous use of the law, and that it's a mirror and it's a guide.
Mm-hmm.
And so I really think with these 13 virtues that we about to go through here with Benjamin Franklin is it kind of goes along the same vein, and something I've always thought about too, that if you live a virtuous life, everything else will kind of take care of itself. Work, family life, things like that. And so it might be a good, and this is a little bit countercultural, of getting back to growing virtues and being a man of character, understanding that that'll take care of itself. Or the other aspects of life might take care of themselves at that point.
For sure. I think oftentimes, especially in our younger years, you get super fired up about wanting to change the world, wanting to do good, wanting to make change. You can't just go out there and make it happen. You've got to do it inward first.
Yeah.
And this is a very good way, I think, to do that.
Yeah. And so the first virtue then, talking about this, is temperance. So how did Benjamin Franklin define temperance?
Well, he defined it as eat not to dullness, drink not to elevation. So to be clear on this, it's not strictly that. He, in his book, in his autobiography, was very explicit in the fact that there were other virtues in other places, like reading Plato or reading Aristotle, people like that.
Yeah.
That were more specific on particular virtues of temperance. Doesn't just mean not to drink too much, not to eat too much. It can be abstracted out to other parts of your life and just limiting inputs and not overindulging, things like that. But he left them intentionally vague for the individual to articulate for themselves, because each of these are going to mean to some degree something different to us than they will to someone else. And if you tailor fit it too much to what Benjamin Franklin would have thought for himself, it wouldn't have been as applicable to other people.
No, and that's a great point. I think Jordan Peterson talks about this too, to where what he suggests, when you're young, you get very ambitious and you kind of shoot for the stars, right?
Yep.
Well, do that. Shoot for the stars, knowing full well that there will get to be this point where maybe you are in over your head a little too much, and then you can temper the expectation to where you're still projecting forward, you're still moving forward, but your expectations are tempered to where they're manageable.
Yeah, you have conquerable steps, as we discussed in previous episodes. Yep.
Yeah, to where, there's a YouTube channel that I really enjoy called Neebs Gaming, which is hilarious. They're the ones that did Battlefield Friends. And the reason why I bring this up is it's kind of funny where they're a gaming channel, but their whole goal is to end world hunger. And it's just kind of a funny thing where it's like, could a gaming channel actually end world hunger? Probably not.
In and of itself, no, but the proceeds and stuff they make from it.
Right.
Sure.
Yeah. And so kind of it's good. And this is where kind of a principle that I like to live by is being a pragmatic idealist, driven by ideals. So driven by virtues, but willing to be pragmatic or practical and have like applicable steps that you can do this. And
for sure.
And it's interesting that Benjamin Franklin starts with temperance in that.
Yeah, I think it's an important first step because you need to limit your inputs before you can really focus in on some of the more difficult things to get right.
Mm-hmm.
And I think in some ways, and it's going to be different for each individual, but it will get more difficult as it goes along to some degree. But I think starting with temperance is a good step. Don't eat too much, don't drink too much, and we'll leave it at that as he put it for now.
Yeah.
You can articulate it as you want to later. It doesn't just mean alcohol. You know, if that's caffeine, if that's really anything, you just don't want to drink to the point where it's just dull.
Yeah.
It's just filling. Same thing with food. You don't need to eat a bunch of garbage until you're just full.
Yeah.
I've struggled with this of, well, I put it on my plate. I want to eat everything on my plate. That is to some degree eating to the point of dullness. You kind of have to practice that one out a little bit until you fine-tune what your stomach is actually capable of. The whole, like, my eyes are bigger than my stomach thing. I do it all the time.
Oh, yeah.
I just need to serve myself less. Eat until it's like, that seems like a reasonable amount. Wait a little bit. Eat a little slower if you are able to.
Mm-hmm.
It's difficult if you're on a job at work or at school or something like that. And you've only got a limited time. But you'll feel more full as time goes on and some of that food expands and it starts digesting. If you drink a little bit more water with when you eat, it'll fill you up a little bit more.
Mm-hmm.
And it'll help it process better.
Yeah.
But just have the self-control and the conscientiousness to pay attention to what you're putting in your body. And if it's too much, limit it.
Yeah.
That's really as simple as our first virtue gets, I think.
Yeah.
What do you think?
Not just the body, but also what you put in your mind. You know, your eyes are the gateway to the soul.
Yep.
We live in a very entertainment-filled world where we carry around these little computers in our pockets, and we're inundated with a lot of inputs. And so it'd be good to temper those inputs. And you can do that in the middle of a city. You don't have to become a monk and go out in the middle of nowhere. No, I mean, that might be beneficial to start out. But we're tempering expectations here. We're trying to find easy steps to do so. So maybe instead of having dessert every night, maybe you have dessert every Sunday.
Yep.
Or maybe you're a big fan of drinking. Well, maybe let's save that for every other night, or even if like tobacco or whatnot as well.
Yep.
There's nothing inherently wrong, although I think it's, from a health standpoint, detrimental.
Yep.
Temper everything. So what about the next virtue?
Yeah. Next we have silence. And as he puts it, speak not but what may benefit others or yourself, avoiding trifling conversations. Putting that in my own common parlance, if you will, don't say anything unless it pertains to the conversation and it is meant to be constructive.
Beneficial to the other parties. Yeah.
For sure.
It reminded me of a proverb, Proverbs 17:28, where it says, even a fool can be considered wise if he keeps his mouth shut. It's just that idea and that understanding. There was another, I'm trying to remember who it was. I think the gentleman's name was Simon. He's on YouTube, all that stuff. He seemed like a really good guy, where what he says, a really good leader is usually the one who doesn't speak first and kind of sets the tone, if you will, but a good leader will be silent most of the time and listen intently to other people and will only speak when necessary.
Yep.
And I think it's that whole speak softly, carry a big stick. It's the whole controlling, again, tempering, controlling your tongue and being profitable in that. And also avoiding trifling conversations. And we usually think, oh, gossip is just what middle school and high school girls do. Nope.
It's everywhere.
It's everywhere. And it's very easy to get caught into that. And I think we have an understanding of what it is. But the question is, are we going to be disciplined enough to not do that?
Yep.
And it's the same thing as well when you're teaching children of, well, children don't talk unless they're being spoken to. They don't talk down or talk to an adult unless they are approached by the adult first, and it's a similar thing. And so I think it's a very good virtue, something that it seems to be, we're all very quick to speak, slow to listen.
Yeah.
And especially with social media, which gives everybody a microphone.
Ironically, as we're sitting here recording.
Right. I know. Yeah. The point for us is to hopefully this is just the conversation starters, if anything.
Right.
But yeah, it's kind of this whole, oh, everyone needs to voice their opinion and say everything about everything. Well, maybe not so. Maybe it's okay to let the conversation go or not even have any inputs. Or if you do have the time to, just be brief, be brilliant, and be gone with the conversation.
Yep. Exactly. Well, on to the next one. Bryce, what do we have?
So the third one is order. And how Benjamin Franklin defines it is, let all your things have their places. Let each part of your business have its time. I think that's a good definition. It's the rightly ordering of things. And in the scriptures, there's this discussion of loves. There are higher loves and lower loves, and it's having the rightly ordered loves. It reminds me of, I think it was Peter who talks about this, who says that, physical training is of some value, but godliness is good for everything. It's that rightly ordered effects of what do you have ordered? Is your love for God and love for neighbor number one, everything else kind of in the right thing. And we see this a lot, and that's what idolatry is. It is placing something above God and worshiping and idolizing this thing versus the Creator.
Yep.
And so, and I like that virtue. It's something where in helping with kind of temperance and helping with the other virtues is here, maybe just sit down and kind of write a list of, well, what do I care about?
Yep.
And then do the self-analysis. Well, if I care so much about this thing, how much time am I devoting to this thing?
Benjamin Franklin broke his day down into, I think it's 6 compartments, basically. The last one being sleep. But he basically planned his day out to have 5 other things in it other than sleep, because sleep is definitely important. He did it carefully, in order. And then his sleep was especially important, and it is especially important for everyone. Not so much the time you sleep, but to have it be repeatable. It doesn't matter if you're going to bed at 8 p.m. or 3 a.m. If you do it on a regular basis, not that I'm, super...
We're not advocating.
I'm not supporting staying up till 3 a.m. just because you're playing video games or whatnot. And I get it. I've done it. I sometimes do it, admittedly. But having the right routine of things is very important. And order is sort of encapsulating this whole virtue practice. Because if you do it orderly, it will go better. It will be easier. It'll be conquerable. It will be improvable, I think, is the most important part.
Yeah.
Is that if you make a mistake today, at the end of my day, when I go back, it's like, well, what did I do that was disorderly? And then make a mark for all those little things that I did.
Right.
It's like, well, now I know where I screwed up. I'm conscious of it. Maybe tomorrow I can do better. Because without order, it's just kind of you're flying by the seat of your pants. And there's times in your life where you just kind of have to do that, especially like survival modes when things are getting difficult.
Oh, yeah, when things are chaotic. I mean, in the military, best plan's only good till first contact.
Right.
Doesn't mean you don't plan. Doesn't mean you don't have an order of things and a structure.
If your day has those 6 parts and one of those parts happens to be more chaotic, at least the other things around it can still be orderly. So maybe you've got to go to a family reunion or something like that, and it's going to be chaotic. It's not going to be super orderly, but it's like, okay, have that be one part of your day. Go do something after that.
Yeah. And maybe that's the part of the day where you be silent.
Yeah. Spend some time reading, spend some time contemplating, spend some time writing, whatever it is. Go for a hike, go to the gym, do something. But it's okay to have structured chaos or, method to madness, so to speak.
No, you're right, and that brings up a good point. As a resident introvert, I've learned that I have a social cap on.
Oh yeah, you and me both.
And I noticed that too. It's like when I was an instructor, what I realized is that took a lot of social currency out of me.
Oh yeah.
And so in those days where I had to teach it all day, I then had to plan times of solitude. And some people, again, this is where, as Benjamin Franklin states, as these are somewhat vague, and that maybe your order are different. Maybe you value social time higher than others. And I'm curious as well, what were the 6 compartments, or how did he break it up? Did he break in terms of time frame, or did he break up in terms of activities? If you remember?
I'm not quite sure. I think it was usually time frame was the setting circumstance, and he set like studying time for this amount of time, and then work for this, and then, working on, like, he started a library in Pennsylvania, so you're devoting time to each project. And I've had to do that when I'm doing cabinets and with the podcast of I'm going to wake up, I'm going to do cabinetry for this amount of time, and it doesn't have to be equal amount of time. I don't need to put 6 hours into that and then come and do 6 hours into this. I'm going to do 6 hours of my cabinetry work that I have to do for work.
Mm-hmm.
And then if I have a break time after that where I structure in a meal with maybe something more relaxing like television or something so my body can rest before I'm ready to approach something like podcast editing or the graphic stuff that I have to do with this. And that's, I think, kind of how he did that. That's at least how I'm going to be doing that. Because I think having it completely perfectly cut for activities isn't exactly right. Having a time is helpful, so you don't go off of how you feel for the day, which I have a tendency to do, where, I just don't have that much energy today like I thought I would for this. I'm going to cut that out early and move to the next thing. It's like, no, push through and do that consistently for a while. You'll find your rhythm. Yeah, just having that more orderly, predictable schedule, really.
Yeah. Oh, I like that. So then the fourth one is resolution. And how did Benjamin Franklin define resolution?
Resolve to perform what you ought, perform without fail what you resolve. So if I'm putting that in my own wording, it would be do what you will and do it well. So like with this podcast or like with my cabinetry, I'm going to do it because to some degree I have to do it and I want to do it. But I'm going to do it to the best of my ability.
Yeah, and there gets to be that time. I think C.S. Lewis talks about this, which is kind of nice. To say, as a young man or as a boy, you really wanted to be a pilot. And just had that resolve or that desire to be a pilot. When you're a young kid, it is all potential and it is all desires. There gets to be that point where, okay, is this actually feasible? It does become feasible, and you start going into the practice. You start doing it. There gets to be that point where all of a sudden, all right, the desire's not there. You're not really passionate about it anymore. That dream is now becoming a reality. And what can happen is, then you drop the dream. And all of a sudden, it kind of becomes, this is what happens to me sometimes, is like something that I wanted to do, that I dreamed of doing, I'm now doing it, and I hate it, if you will. All of a sudden, you start losing that resolve. And I think what probably Benjamin Franklin is getting at here, which I agree, is there needs to be that level of resolve in one's life of, okay, I know this is a good thing. I know I can do this, right? It's kind of like a three-pronged criteria. Do I want to do it? Do I have the abilities to do it? And then do I have the resolve? When that desire and those abilities start fading, do I have the resolve to continue through with it, if it's a good thing?
Yeah, the forbearance, if you will, just to keep, or persistence even, just to keep pushing through it.
Right. And I can think as men, sometimes it can be focused on career or focused on a tangible project like, all right, I want to fix the boat or I want to fix the house. But this could also be in terms of relationships as well.
Sure.
So I think it's a good resolve to have, and I like how in the order, where it's after order. Make sure we order things rightly and then have the resolve to execute in this orderly manner.
Yep.
So what's the next one then, Tim?
Next one we've got is frugality, which, as he defines it, is make no expense but to do good to others or yourself, i.e. waste nothing. Pretty straightforward.
Yeah, and most of these virtues are straightforward. And I think with the frugality is, you know it when you see it.
Yep.
And have that understanding of, I think when he's saying make no expenses, don't live in excess to where you then become a burden to others, possibly. And when we think of frugality or being frugal, we think primarily financially. But there's also the understanding of being frugal with just resources, your time, your energy, your abilities, and whatnot as well. And being frugal with them, I think, is, again, that tempering expectations is you want to use your ability. You don't want to use it in such an excess to where it becomes a waste. And also, you don't want to have so little of it. Like maybe you are a fantastic writer, or maybe you do have these good abilities, but also wasting it by not using it as well.
Yeah.
That's where I think with frugal, I've always liked that term just because people think, oh, I'm cheap. Well, there's a difference between being cheap and being frugal.
Right.
Being frugal is maybe buying a good vehicle, but you buy it used.
I was going to use the computer I just got for an example. I went on Amazon and I could have easily spent $3,000 on something that would have done absolutely everything I needed it to do.
Yep.
But through you, actually, you had a friend that was selling their used tower.
Yep.
And I went that route, and I still needed a monitor, so I did go to Amazon for that. But with something like that, you look through the other options of what's used but still in good shape and stuff like that. Just being more intentional about where your money goes, but your money comes from, hopefully, the effort that you've put into something.
Yeah.
So you're also being conscious with your energy there. And I know very well how to be frugal with my energy, because with some of the health stuff I've had in my past,
for sure,
you run low on it and it's in short supply. So don't just start throwing all of your best attention at every person that asks for it, or that every project that asks for it. Not every high spot needs sanding, if you will, but be particular, frugal with your time, your energy, your resources, all of that, for sure.
Yeah. The next one is industry, and how Benjamin Franklin, how he defines it is, lose no time, be always employed in something useful, cut off unnecessary actions.
Pretty straightforward on that one there too, I think.
Yeah, and I like that too. When I think of someone who is industrious, this is someone who is entrepreneurial to a degree. Someone who sees projects and is able to schedule time, logistics, resources to actually make it happen. And I like where he also adds it, be employed in something useful. And this is something I think we'll see like in the higher education that we talked about last episode a little bit. I think we touched on it briefly of, are you learning something and are you being challenged to learn things that are actually beneficial? Underwater basket weaving, and that's kind of the butt end of every joke, right? Is there an actual benefit? Well, if there is a market for it and a desire for it, possibly, but in practicality, is that actually? No, it's not. And we could take this one step further. Is the degree that you're going for, and maybe some who are in college age, they're trying to think of what degrees to go with, if they even go for a degree. I think it's more industrial to have tangible, maybe trade skills, or maybe being a little business savvy, even getting a job at McDonald's. Maybe you're just a high schooler and you got a lot of excess time on your hands. Go get a job. It is good to get a job. You'll learn personal skills. You'll learn responsibilities, management. Yeah, I mean, the benefits, you get a little money in your pocket. That's great. But it's more about you're building tangible skills. And that's what an industrious person does, is they build skills and abilities. And if they don't have the skill and ability, either learn it themselves or find people who do and know how to apply those things. And, for me, when I'm going to start this manufacturing engineering job, right? I mean, that's just industry 101, is either learning how to build something, how to design, manufacture something, or working with people who do for the sake of the industry. And cutting off all unnecessary actions. I love that as an engineer. Engineers, we love efficiency. It's like our love language. When something is perfectly efficient and running like a smooth machine, I don't know, it gets us excited. That is what we like. And industry should be that way. It's not, oh, I'm just going to waste a bunch of product and whatnot to get this one little measly thing. We want efficiency in those approaches as well.
For sure. Well, what do we have for sincerity?
Yeah, sincerity, as he defines it, is use no hurtful deceit, think innocently and justly, and if you speak, speak accordingly. Any thoughts on that one?
Use no hurtful deceit, so more or less don't lie. Think innocently and justly. I think that means to assume the best in someone, and if you speak, speak accordingly.
Yeah, I think it's just being sincere and being intentional with your actions and with your language. It reminds me of the Bible verse where it says we want to be as wise as serpents, but as innocent as doves. Being sincere in your actions as well. And you can tell that. It's something that what I'm grateful with my family is we want to be pretty sincere people. And kind of a pet peeve of mine is someone who is very insincere if they're putting on a mask or putting on a face to try to fit in. Just think about it, my few closest friends, one of those attributes that I see in all of them is sincerity.
Mm-hmm.
They are sincerely themselves, and they will sincerely speak their minds as needed. You being really the primary one there, Tim. Being very sincere. And use no hurtful deceit. I think that is very helpful because sometimes we, Jordan Peterson, right? Like being disagreeable, that's not inherently a bad thing.
Mm-hmm.
But if you're constantly being disagreeable on all facets of life, you're really being more of a nuisance than anything else.
Yeah, and I think being sincere properly when you're considering the 13 virtues we're working through is practicing the virtues and doing them instead of signaling them. Because virtue signaling does no one any good. It's insincere. It's a very self-aggrandizing look at how good I'm being.
Yeah.
And it only, to anyone with their eyes open, makes you look like a fool.
Yep.
So, I'd be happy to admit all of my faults on every single one of these virtues and my mistakes on them. And you also won't see me speaking on mountains about how well I'm doing on them.
Yeah. Paul in Romans speaks boldly about that. It's like, you hypocrites, you who say you not to do such things, do you not break the laws yourself?
Yeah.
So on to virtue 8, justice. So how do you define justice?
Wrong none by doing injuries or omitting the benefits that are your duty. It's kind of a weirdly worded one.
Yeah.
What have you got on that, Bryce?
Yeah, and kind of looking at that, wrong no one by doing injuries. I think it's not just physical injuries, but relational, or when it has to do with your reputation, whatnot, or omitting the benefits that are your duty. It's the golden rule, I think, is really kind of at its core is, love your neighbor as yourself. Do unto others as you would want to be done unto you. It's in Matthew 7:12. And so it's really that idea of you don't want to hurt anyone, right? And when you look at the 10 Commandments, right, you don't covet your neighbor's stuff. You don't murder. You don't all that stuff. But there's also benefits that if you do the right thing, you want to be generous in that as well. It's kind of like in the parable where it talks about the unwise farmer who he has all these abundance of crops. And so what he does, he tears them down, he builds bigger barns, tears them down, and all of a sudden eventually he just sits there and like, oh, I don't have to do anything for the rest of my life. And it says, you fool.
Yeah.
All that's going to rot away and thieves are going to come and steal it from you. It's like, be wise in what you're dealing. And a form of justice and the golden rule is sometimes God blesses you mightily, whether you have abilities or means or whatnot. And a form of justice is you protect the innocent, you bless the righteous and punish the wicked. At least that's what the government should be doing and what we should be doing as well, or at least advocating injustice. So in kind of reading that, a rather weird definition that how he defined it, but helpful in that I think it's another thing where we have a strong sense of justice. I think everyone really does. I think the law of God is written on everyone's heart.
Yeah.
We have these criterias of like, well, that's right, that's wrong. And I think what Benjamin Franklin wants to do is get back to living in a just society and living in that virtue of justice. And I think he would probably agree 200 years ago that there was an objective standard of justice. And I think that's probably what he's getting to. All in all, just get back to that golden rule. Do unto others as you would want done unto you.
Yep.
And in that justice, don't wrong anyone, and also don't withhold benefits as well. I think this is where, in the church in particular, man, bless the church, bless the family of God. You have skills and abilities. You have spiritual gifts. You should be using them. In the context of the church, I also think in the broader context as well of your community. But man, you want to bless your family, either the family of God or if you have an actual family as well, and be just in your dealings.
Yeah, positive and negative reinforcement basically is how I read that one. Reward what is good, correct what isn't.
Yep.
On to the next one, moderation. Avoid extremes, forbear resenting injuries so much as you think they deserve, which I just put as don't overreact.
Yeah, because that second part could be a little wonky, but yeah, I think it's don't be, like you said, overreactionary. Things are going to happen. Be moderate in your approach to things. Again, it goes back to temperance or being frugal. You want to have the moderate, and I kind of see a pattern in his virtues of he kind of gets to really that foundation of living living a virtuous life is a life of moderation and temperance and being frugal.
Yeah, he's bootstrapping these ideas. You start small, and then you've got to kind of pull yourselves up. Mm-hmm. And once you've got that, it's like, okay, this next one's more conquerable. Okay, this next one, and you're just building off of each other.
Yeah, and so moderation, and again, I think we know it when we see it, and I really think for the individual too, just kind of looking at my life, is like, I know what it means to be moderate.
Right.
Are we living that out?
Yeah, exactly. What do we got for next one?
So cleanliness, I think one of the most straightforward ones, and it says, tolerate no uncleanliness in body, clothes, or habitation. It's the old Jordan Peterson, clean your room. Yep. And kind of expanding upon it a little bit is, I've always found it somewhat comical in that how somebody has their room set up, or it could be their whole living space, but primarily speaking, where they sleep in their room is really a reflection of them as a personality. Mm-hmm. You know, for instance, just kind of thinking with my room right now, most of it looks generally clean. I mean, vacuumed it, did some laundry and whatnot. That's good. But man, the closet's kind of a mess, you know? And so it's like with Jordan Peterson, I think he talked about it once with a client, and he had extreme anxieties to where he said what he had to do with this client was, okay, just pick up one sock a day and do your laundry there. It's like start very, very small, and eventually the little by little steps. And we've heard it said cleanliness is next to godliness. That can be debated, but I think by and large it's somewhat true. Where I see this, and everywhere I go with homes, most homes that I go, is that those who live the virtuous life just out of habit.
Yep.
Granted, there are some times, let's say when you're out in the field in the military, okay, if you haven't shaved for a couple days, or maybe, your clothes are a little bit smelly, like, sure, I can tolerate in those field conditions. But when you get back to garrison, you see it all the time. The first thing the NCOs say is, listen, wash your dirty bodies, get a haircut, get back to being trim and proper.
Yep, for sure.
Yeah, so the next one is tranquility. You don't hear that word too often, but tranquility. How is tranquility defined?
Well, he says, be not disturbed by trifles or at accidents common or unavoidable. Basically, don't get upset for the guy that cuts you off, or for me more personally, the guy that doesn't use his turn signal.
Yep.
I can get upset over things like that. So this is one I will have to work on.
Oh, yeah.
I'm a little bit more volatile, I think, if I'm using Big Five terminology. This one I'm going to have to work on for sure when the time comes.
Yeah.
But just understanding if it's out of your control, it's out of your control.
Yeah.
Just leave it where it is, let it unfold as it will, and just do what you can on your end.
Yeah, and I think when it comes to tranquility, it's kind of been hijacked a little bit by hippies. You know, it's kind of this view of, oh, the most tranquil person is this hippie that's high on marijuana in California and just kind of living life, and like, you know, like the Big Lebowski, right? I'm the dude, man. It's like, okay, sure, he might be living a tranquil life, but he's also living a somewhat meaningless and aimless life.
I don't know if I'd call it tranquil. There's a difference between like being tranquil and being tranquilized.
Yeah.
Like one, you're just asleep and relatively useless.
Yeah. Aimless,
the other is you're more calmly tempered.
Yeah. Kind of getting back to that is where I think there's been a little bit of a hijacking of that term to where we think to be tranquil is to be tranquilized. Like, no. You need to be in society. You need to be involved. You need to be, again, all the other virtues before this. Be all those things. And I think when you have those virtues, you can then be more tranquil.
Yeah, because you have something to work from.
Yeah, exactly. And it's just so true. It's like, don't be disturbed by the little things, especially things out of your control.
Yep.
And if they are within your control too, maybe there are some things, say you're on a big project and you're on a team. Maybe someone's slacking on your team, right? Well, the tranquil thing to do is not just to, live and let be, but of like, approach the man, right, in a sincere and in a modest form and talk to him about this. The tranquility too, I think it's just kind of being level-headed as well.
Yep.
Not being so volatile. I think it's okay to have emotions. It's okay to express them at appropriate times, but the tranquil person will know how to temper those accordingly.
I think a term people could probably more generally associate with it as being stoic.
Yeah.
To some degree.
Yeah.
It's not being cold, it's just letting things go over you that don't really affect you.
Yep. I like that.
Or that aren't directly aimed towards you. It's like, look, most of these things, it's basically the exact same thing he talks about in Sincerity. It's doing that backwards to a certain degree of assuming that someone does have your best intention or didn't mean ill intention by something they said. They had good faith in the way that they're going about things. Even if it's poorly, it still is an effort.
Yeah.
And not reacting to that. Again, this is back to moderation. And not getting so fired up on one missaid thing, or even if it is intentional. Overreacting is not the right answer. So approaching something calmly, don't let it get to you. Yeah. If you've got to solve it, then solve it carefully from a position of calmness. Even if you're fired up about it, and I get fired up about things and can still remain calm.
Yeah.
But it doesn't mean the drive's not there. It just means that approaching this hot is not going to be the way to do it.
Yeah.
So approaching things a little bit more carefully, a little more cautiously, and just letting the things that don't need to stick. Yeah. Just let it fall away.
For sure. So the second to last one, chastity. Ooh boy. Mr. Franklin, how he defines it is, rarely use venery, but for health and offspring. And venery means sexuality, if I recall, right?
Pretty much.
Okay. Never to dullness, weakness, or injury of your own or another's peace or reputation. I do think that this is definitely a virtue that is not very promoted in today's society. To put it lightly.
The opposite of it is promoted.
Correct. Yeah, the sensuality is, and this is where it's an unfortunate thing. I mean, this could be a whole nother episode, but to be chaste is simply just to be modest in your sexuality. We're not looking for a Victorian era where it's like if you see someone's ankles, you're wrong. Or
yeah, you don't need to be a prude.
Right, or even to the extreme as well. I mean, I've even seen this in some churches where it's like women aren't allowed to wear pants.
Yeah, I talked with a woman once upon a time who, interesting conversation, but she said she had to find a new church because there was too much pants wearing going on.
Yeah.
I don't know if in the last millennia we've heard that, or the last, century at least. It was just interesting to hear. That's taking it a little too far, I guess.
Yeah, and I can understand that. I mean, to live modestly, right, again, there's a little bit of wiggle room in the definition. How I think the scriptures make clear is that women should not be wearing men's clothes, men should not be wearing women's clothes. I think that's just abundantly clear. Now, what is defined as men's clothes and women's clothes, that can change, and it does change with culture over time. I mean, look at Benjamin Franklin's era, right?
Yep.
They wore tights. They wore white tights as men.
Yep.
Right? And now we're seeing that more and more, which personally I'm not a fan of, like the whole skinny jeans, not a fan of. But teach their own, I guess. It's just something where when it comes to chastity, you know what it is, I think, for the most part, especially if you come from a religious background. There are two ditches, and I think, culturally speaking, we're definitely down into one ditch where we just completely abandon the virtue in general. And to the point where it's just so sad, where like women think that they need to be sensual in order to get a mate. And likewise, men think that it's okay to be considered a, if you will, like a sex god or something weird like that. Like
a player or something like that. Or
a player, a playboy and whatnot. And it's just, that's not being chaste either. And it's on both sides.
Yep.
And so I appreciate that he brings it up, and that he says, rarely use venery, but for health and for offspring. I think he's just talking about it's, personally, if you use it in the confines of marriage, then it is healthy, and it does produce offspring. If you're outside of that confines, well, that's when it can hurt. And it says, never to dullness, weakness, right? There are those who even use sex as a form of drug to dull themselves.
Yep.
Or for injury of one's own peace or reputation as well. You see that a lot in politics and other predominant things, right? Even the most heinous secular atheist can say, oh, it's so wrong that that person cheated on this other person. Like, even those who won't acknowledge the existence of God even knows that, well, it's good to be chaste at least. If they didn't think so, they'd probably be walking around naked.
Sounds good to me. Let's go.
Yeah. Which then brings the last one.
Yeah.
Humility. And he has 4 words for humility. So what are they?
Imitate Jesus and Socrates, which that's a high bar.
That is a very high bar.
And a somewhat controversial one from some of the conversations I've had, that it seems he's equating Socrates to Jesus. I don't know if that's exactly what he's doing.
Yeah.
But I think ultimately, if we are to imitate Jesus, it is imitating him in his love. And if we're imitating Socrates, it is imitating him in his being reasonable, being careful, being thoughtful.
Yeah.
And I don't mean thoughtful as you're considerate of emotions, although that can be part of it, it's that you're actually thinking.
Yeah. And how I read this is, when it comes to humility, imitate Jesus. That should just be the absolute focus. Now, in doing so, I think Paul talks about this, where imitate me as I imitate Christ. Walk as I walk, do as I do, talk as I talk kind of deal. And it's like with raising children, right? The first thing that most children will do is they will simply start imitating their parents.
Mm-hmm.
And you pray and you hope that your parents are virtuous people, godly people as well. And so how I kind of read that humility, which it's kind of funny in that this last virtue, and again, how the approach and how he does it. Start with virtue 1. Once you quote unquote master that, go to the next virtue. The last one being humility. I think that's a good cap on it, because if you think about Jesus, Jesus is God. He's the Son of God. He is the definition of a virtuous life. And yet he humbled himself. Humbled himself to the point of a servant. Humbled himself to the cross. Humbled himself. And so it's kind of I like the cap and how you have all these different virtues. There will get to be a point where possibly you're then boasting about these virtues.
Yeah.
But that end cap is, nope, you need to be humble in your pursuits.
Yep.
And if you want to be humbled, just look to Jesus and compare yourself to him and see how well you're doing.
Yeah.
And if you actually have any sense of a sincere, sober approach, you will realize you can never live up to Christ. And that's where grace and faith comes in.
And that's kind of the point.
Yeah.
Is it's a very high bar, and you're supposed to always shoot for it and never quite reach it. And I think it's a cap that's not really a cap, because he intended that once you finish humility, you go right back to temperance and work the plan again.
Yeah.
And you just continually do it, and hopefully you get better and better as you go along.
Yeah.
And it's not a race. It's not I want to be the first to get through humility before my friends do. It's just to improve as an individual, as a person, to better serve God, to better serve your family, your friends, your community, and yourself.
Yeah, that's good. So here we'll mention all of them again. And then Tim, if you want to explain just real briefly and how that worksheet works, and then we'll go from there. So here are the 13 virtues again to cap it off. You have temperance, silence, order, resolution, frugality, industry, sincerity, justice, moderation, cleanliness, tranquility, chastity, and humility.
Yep. And again, we do have a workbook, if you will, that's what it's labeled as, for these virtues, that has a sheet with all of the virtues as Benjamin Franklin articulated them. You can write in a notebook to articulate them more if you need to. You can add more. You can do whatever you need to. It's just a good framework to work from.
Yeah.
And then there is an example of what that chart that I was mentioning earlier looks like. You can print that off and use it. I've printed one off for myself. I'm going to be using pencils so I can make little marks every time I screw this thing up. I'm going to mark it in pencil, and then when I get through that end of the week, I'll go back to it and erase that for the day and then start new and keep going. Or you can just print off more copies. So you kind of have a progress report, if you will, of, well, 2 weeks ago, I'm still working on temperance, let's say. 2 weeks ago on Monday, I had 3 checks, but today I only had 1. That's improving. You know, this doesn't need to be quick. Again, it's not a race.
Yeah.
It's just for self-improvement.
Yeah.
So there's instructions in that workbook to be able to work through how to do it And there's a link in the description and in the workbook to his autobiography with a page number. I think it's 50 on that PDF, that you can see what he had to say about it. There's quite a few pages before it gets to the virtues themselves of some of his religious upbringing and things like that I think are useful to understand, so you can see why he believes these virtues to be virtuous.
Yeah.
So hopefully that helps you guys out. I'm going to be working on them too.
Yeah. Maybe you might be a little burned out from New Year's resolutions and kind of want to get some vigor back in. Well, here is a tool. Here is something that maybe you can join us with.
Yep.
So thank you for listening. We hope you have found this episode of the 13 Virtues useful in your pursuit of truth. If you found these useful and helpful, we hope this starts the conversation. Share this with a friend, family member, anyone you might want to start a discussion with on these things and what it means to live a virtuous life.
Well, this is Tim.
And this is Bryce.
Look forward to talking with you next time. Bye-bye.